Professor Lee Innes, you've got an honours degree in immunology and you've got a PhD in tropical animal health. What interested you about these two areas?
Well, when I went to university, I was actually very interested in how our bodies respond to infection and how our immune system works. So I was very, very keen on studying immunology because I was quite keen on doing work to control infectious diseases. So to do that, you have to understand how your immune system can defend yourself against a range of different pathogens. And during my life when I was growing up, I was very interested in livestock, farming and horses. So what I did was then I shifted over when I came to Edinburgh to do the PhD in tropical animal health. Because also at that age, I was very keen to travel, see a bit of the world. So I studied tropical animal health, particularly parasites. I was very interested in that because it brought together my interest in infectious diseases and immunology. Because parasites have learnt to live inside us and other animals, and they do that by diverting our immune responses. So in fact, you can learn a lot about how our immune system works by studying parasites. And that's what I did in a very nice locations in Morocco and then Kenya.
Talk me through some of the research you've conducted into animal health.
Well, when I was actually doing my PhD, I was working part of the time in Morocco and part of the time in Edinburgh. And we were studying a disease called tropical theileriosis, and it's a tick-borne disease of cattle. And one of the issues with it is that a lot of the cattle, they are trying to increase the production. So looking at more efficient production for meat and milk in many of the countries in Africa. And what they did was they were looking to import cattle from Europe into Africa to increase the production. So our project was all about trying to prevent this disease because it would kill cattle really quickly within about 4 to 6 weeks. So we were making a vaccine against this disease. And I think in my naivety, as this was my first research project, I just assumed everything was going to work. And in this project, actually, it went like clockwork. And it was a live vaccine. And during my studies in immunology, I understood that if you have a live vaccine, it's much more likely to induce the immune response you're trying to get. But the problem is you've got a short shelf life, you've got to get that vaccine into the cattle really quickly because if it dies, it won't work. We vaccinated the cattle and we protected them against the disease. Now this all went, I just thought this is what you do. You make a vaccine and it works. But I think that was the high point of my career, if I'm absolutely honest with you. And then since then, it's been actually taking that apart a bit more and looking at, okay, how would you get the vaccine to work? And one thing is it the right thing to do? Because one of the things I noticed when I was working in Morocco and subsequently in Kenya was that, in fact, if you looked around you, the answer to the problem was right in front of you, and that was to use the native cattle. So the native animals that were born there, evolved there, were resistant and resilient to a lot of these diseases that we were trying to vaccinate against. And it occurred to me, particularly when I worked in Kenya, I did a postdoc in Kenya, and there's a disease called sleeping sickness that you've probably heard of. It's transmitted by the tsetse fly. It causes major problems in cattle, also causes problems in people. But again, the answer was right in front of us. The local cattle were resilient to sleeping sickness, and there was a huge amount of money spent with people trying to do cross-breeding programs with imported European cattle to try and increase the productivity, and they all died of trypanosomiasis. So what I learned over the years was sometimes the answer is around you in nature if you look at it and you're observant enough to see it.
Some years ago you became interested in the communication of science and you're now head of communication at the Moredun. Is communication in the scientific world more important than it's ever been?
Yes, I think the short answer to your question is I think absolutely. I think I became more interested in this probably about halfway through my career Because as scientists, the bread and butter of what we do is we publish research papers, and these are the bricks on which we build our knowledge. But I was very aware that most of the research papers we write are only read by other scientists. So there's a lot of knowledge there that is not getting out to people who might benefit from it. So I felt that we as scientists should really take a step forward and communicate our work more effectively. To try and make sure that people who need it get access to it. But also I felt very strongly that our funders are mainly the public. The public probably don't know that they fund so much science. And I think it's also a duty for us to communicate what we do to the public so that there's an understanding of some of the solutions that we could all get to solve some of the huge issues we're dealing with. At the moment, people are obviously, COVID-19, the latest pandemic, has really focused people. They immediately turn to, well, why don't we have a vaccine? Let's have more testing. What can we do about it? And I think that really made people value science again. And I also think that as a scientist, I have learned so much from communicating my work to others, and also getting their input and their perspective on what we're trying to achieve.
What are the challenges of persuading scientists to package their work in a way that the layman can understand?
I think a lot of scientists are a bit afraid of getting it wrong. So when we do our scientific papers, we're doing very detailed work. It has to be like that to make sure the paper is accurate, and it's a little brick on the way of the road to make sure we've got all our science there in an accurate way. But often I think a lot of people reading those papers would say, I don't know what you're talking about, this is too complicated, what's the point of this and what's the purpose of it? So I think then it's a duty of scientists really to step forward and try and make that more understandable for people. And it's really getting to the essence of the work. Why is it important? Why is it exciting? And why is it useful for people to know that?
I've been asking all of the guests in this series of interviews the same question. What does One Health mean to you, and how do you apply it to your work?
For me, One Health is a sort of inclusive science, and it brings in the health of people, animals, plants, trees, the environment. So for me, it's like the health of our natural world. And the key thing for me is the participation of all the parts. And I think sometimes when you do collaborations and you bring people together with different interests, you get a really good multiplier effect because you bring in their different perspectives. And I think one of the huge challenges we've got at the moment is how to protect our natural world, because it's nature that supports life on Earth. So if we don't get that right, we've got a lot of problems.
And how do you employ a One Health approach to food and farming, the particular area that Moredun's interested in?
I think it's hugely significant in food and farming because it brings in all aspects of how we make the best use of our land and our natural world, understanding the ecosystems that really provide life for us. We talk about food security, so having enough food for people to eat, but not only having enough, it's got to be nutritious, and it's got to have a low impact on the environment. So I think in the context of food and farming, One Health is absolutely vital to understand all of those elements.
You quote Burns Selkirk Grace in the topic for this conversation. How apt is the line, some hear meat and cannot eat and some would eat that want it, in the context of the food security issues we're facing in the world?
I think particularly in Scotland we've got an interesting situation, and this is what it reminded me of. In Scotland we produce some of the finest food in the world, and yet if you look at some of the diets in Scotland, we've got some of the poorest diets. So it's trying to bring a lot of that together to look at how can we improve how we produce food to have lower impact on the environment, higher levels of nutrition, and also help people eat properly, because what you eat, and what you eat really affects your health. So I think bringing all of that together is really important.
Scotland has ambitious targets for growing its food industry to 30 billion by 2030. How do we balance that growth with dealing with some of the big issues like climate change and biosecurity issues?
Well, it's a good question, not an easy one to answer. But what I would say from my perspective is looking at the appliance of science to that. So there's some fantastic work going on in Scotland at the moment within the safari organisations. And they're a group of 6 institutes, the Moredun, SRUC, James Hutton, the Rowett Institute, Biomathematics and Statistics Scotland, and the Royal Botanic Garden. So all of those institutes together are working to conduct research to try and help us improve how we grow food, the nutritional quality of the food we produce, choices in land use. And I think this is really critical as we go forward, because we are dealing with climate change, we're dealing with loss of biodiversity, and the challenges are, can we grow enough food for people? Can we grow the right sort of food? And are we making the right dietary choices? So all of these institutes are working together, funded by the Scottish Government. And I think Scotland has been very, has had a lot of foresight in this. Scotland has always been a champion, I think, of science and education. And I think the work coming out of these institutes, some really interesting examples of how we can apply science to perhaps find solutions for these really difficult challenges we've got going forward.
Can you give me an example of how scientific organisations are working towards the industry goal of growing the industry, but are dealing with some of the big issues that lie behind it?
Yeah, there's some, I think, really interesting work. I'm probably going to go back to what I'm particularly interested in. But inside us and animals, there's lots of different bugs. And one of the things that is quite interesting is if you look at Scotland's landscape, about 60 or 70% of that would be considered less favoured area for agriculture. But it's perfect for livestock, something of grazing animals. And what they do really well is they convert cellulose that's very difficult to digest into high quality protein, sort of meat and milk. And the reason they can do that is inside the rumen, you've got these bacteria, so we're again getting back to microbiology, but these bacteria that will convert that. But the other thing we've got is, of course, I know people are very concerned sometimes about livestock because a byproduct of that is methane, which is one of the greenhouse gases which we're all concerned about. So again, by studying the microbiome there, scientists within Safari have found out that some of the bugs that are producing the methane, they're different from the ones that are converting the cellulose. So what we're trying to do is look at getting more of the good bugs, I should say, that are doing the job in terms of efficiency of productivity, efficiency of using the cellulose to produce meat and milk, and to reduce the ones that are producing the methane. So some very interesting work going on there to understand all that and select for animals that would be low methane producers but high converters.
And how important is this work in terms of our target of meeting carbon net zero by 2045?
I remember speaking to one of the farmers we work with, and he described it as the right cow in the right place. And again, I'm going back to something I mentioned to you earlier about Africa, but sometimes the answer is right in front of you. And I think if we look at improving our biodiversity, both in the breeds of animals we use, but also the types of crops and plants we plant that are specific that will work best in a Scottish climate. And you could translate this all over the world. Look at what works best in the climate you're in with the land you've got to produce the best crops or the best animals. And I'm reminded as well back to time in Kenya, where there was some excellent work going on looking at indigenous plants in Kenya that had a much higher nutritional value than the crops, the major crops that were being planted. And it made me think very much as it's not the quantity of what you produce, it's the quality. And if we go back to Scotland, There's been, again, interesting work going on in safari to look at what kind of new plants could we grow that would suit our climate, that are low carbon, but high nutrition. So one of the plants people are looking at just now is hemp, which used to be grown in Scotland. It's very low carbon, it's very high in protein, minerals that you need. And it's a crop that's being introduced back into Scotland. It's also good for textiles, it's good for making rope too. So I think within safari, people are looking at what new crops could we plant that would work in Scotland. And another quite interesting example is the use of peas, which are very high protein crop. And they've been used to make the first, I think it's the first climate change gin in Scotland. And it's made from peas, but there's a byproduct that's very good for animal feed too. So again, it's a good use of trying to reduce waste, look at new crops we could produce in Scotland, and a new product, which is gin, which we all love.
Collaboration is one of the key cornerstones of the One Health approach. Can you give me an example of the work here at the Moredun that you've done that demonstrates that you don't just work with other scientific organisations, but work with a whole range of public agencies too?
Yes, I mean, collaboration is critical to science and particularly to One Health. And at the Moredun, we are owned and governed by farmers. So a lot of the work we do is relevant to the farming industry. And one of the examples that we're working on recently is, it's a good One Health example, but there's a parasite called Cryptosporidium, which is a major headache for the water industry. So the parasite can be transmitted through the environment into water courses. So this can be a real problem for Scottish Water or other water agencies. It's not just a disease in Scotland, it occurs throughout the world. But the parasite is quite hardy and it will survive in the environment for a long time. So it's difficult to get rid of it from water supplies, and people can get infected if they drink water that's contaminated. So there was an issue up on the Glenlivet estate where there had been contamination of water supplies. And because the Moredun have got a very good relationship with the farming community, because we're owned and governed by farmers, what we did was we were able to get access up there to apply some science to the problem. And this is where collaboration really comes in. We were able to look at where the parasite was in the environment, within the animals and within wildlife, and apply that science to look for solutions to the problem. And what we did was, this is where collaboration comes in. You bring everyone into the problem, find out their different perspectives, put the science on the table, as it were, and say, here are the facts, and then you can start working on mitigation strategies. And that's exactly what we did, and worked with the landowners as well. So we got solutions by fencing off the areas around the water courses, doing some workshops with the farmers to say how can we reduce the levels of infection and how can we handle waste on the farms. And as a result of all of that, there is now much cleaner water supplies up there, and the reduction in the presence of Cryptosporidium in the water. So it was a real win-win working with everybody, and that was a really good collaboration.
There's a lot of concern about the potential of running out of drugs and medicines. What successes has science had in terms of solving that problem?
I think it's a huge problem going forward, and I think my interest, if we go back to my past, was very much on understanding immunology, understanding our immune response and that of animals and how we resist infection. And I'm a firm believer that prevention is better than cure. And if we look at any drugs or medicines that have been developed that have been life-saving, there's no doubt about that. But if you look at the evolution of microbiology, the bugs and the parasites that we're dealing with, they will develop very good resistance to all of these drugs eventually. If we look at malaria, we use drugs prophylactically if we travel. A big issue with malaria parasites is they will develop resistance. And if we go a bit closer to home, some of the work that's going on in safari, A big issue with a lot of livestock farmers is dealing with parasites, particularly parasitic worms. And the mainstay of that control is using drugs. And eventually the parasites will become resistant to the drugs. So some of the work going on is in the Safari Institutes is to look at alternatives to that. So we're looking at can we reduce the amount of times we're treating animals by reducing treatment only to the animals that need it. And this is quite similar if we look at AMR, when people are very anxious, and rightly so, about the resistance to a lot of the bugs to the antibiotics that we've taken as for granted. It's very similar with the treatment with worms. So one of the breakthroughs we've had recently in the Safari Institutes is to develop a vaccine against parasitic worms. And that has been a huge holy grail for us working on vaccines because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, parasites are very, very good at evading our immune responses. So this has been a huge breakthrough. And if we can apply the use of vaccination, it means you're reducing the amount of drugs and treatments you're going to need, which is much better all round.
We started the conversation talking about your passion for communication. How well do you think science is doing at the moment in communicating some of these messages?
It's a really good question. I think there's a lot more work we can do on how we communicate our science. And I also think there's a lot of really good news stories from the scientific world that I think the public would be really interested to hear. I think often what we hear a lot about is the doom and gloom. You know, what's going wrong, and what we don't hear enough about is what's going right. And I think that there's perhaps there's a lot more work I think we can do as scientists to step forward and communicate what is going right. Some of the really good news stories that are coming out, and I think it would maybe help reassure the public that there are things we can do, and there are things that they can do. There's a lot of really interesting citizen science projects that the public have been getting involved in that I think makes them at a local level feel that they can make a difference. And I think that's absolutely vital for us going forward. If people think that by changing something they're doing, changing some practices, looking at a local level at biodiversity, looking at what they're eating, understanding how that affects the planet and nature, everything around us, I think we can get more change and change what we do going forward.
So what impact will having the World One Health Congress here in Edinburgh, albeit virtually, have in terms of improving the communication messages coming from science?
I think it's really important that we're having the World One Health Congress here in Edinburgh, or anywhere, to be honest. I think the public will be very, very interested to find out what has been going on with science and learn more about it. Because I think at the moment with COVID, everybody has been totally focused on this pandemic. It has changed everybody's lives. And I think they're very interested to hear some good news stories. You know, what is going on in the world of science? How can we change how we live our lives? We've got huge challenges coming up with climate change, loss of biodiversity, but science will provide solutions for that. And I think the more we can engage with people, get them involved in their world, they can make a difference, and it's their future.
Professor Lee Innes, thank you very much.